Hello, my name is Christopher Thomas, Data Compliance Analyst with the Office for the Lancaster County Homelessness Coalition. This is part of our Empower Lancaster Basic Training series. So far in this series, we've talked about just the very basics for Empower Lancaster, like logging in, changing your password, finding clients, navigating the left-hand side of the screen using buttons over here, and then also looking at the client dashboard to get basic information about clients. The next step will be enrolling clients. For context, enrollments are a necessary part of a lot of different things in Empower Lancaster. Besides the obvious, it's how that we know a client is in a program. It's also got two other important functions. One is that enrollments allow us to show that clients have achieved goals, made progress. For example, an enrollment is how a program would show that a client entered with one housing status, say they were category 1 homeless, and left with a different status, say they exited to permanent housing. An enrollment is what captures that information. The same can be said for changes in income, benefits, status, health insurance. All these things get rolled into an enrollment, and it's by reporting on those enrollments that we can show that we are succeeding in our programs. This is also kind of the basic building block for reporting to HUD, which is something that we have to do on a regular basis. So I can't stress enough how important enrollments are, and recording accurate information in enrollments is paramount. The second thing is that your organization most likely bills for services based on the amount of time spent or client assistance funds for reimbursement. Those can only be associated with an enrollment. So we can't enter services for a client in a vacuum. That has to be attached to an enrollment. So again, just to reiterate, enrollments are very, very important. So we're going to take our time going over how the enrollment works in Empower Lancaster. We'll kind of go through it start to finish here, take our time, and we'll be able to see when we're finished, what we've achieved. So the place to start, obviously, is over here on the left side of the screen, the plus sign, add/enroll client. If you click this, it will pop out and you'll have some options. I would recommend clicking Express Intake. Now a new window will pop up. If you've already been working somewhere else in Empower Lancaster and have not finished what you are working on, you will see this dialog reminding you to either return to an existing workflow or to close it out so you can start a new one. In this case, I was working with a test client. So I'm going to click this X to exit the workflow, and now it will take me into a new one. The first thing you'll notice is that even though we were looking at Sheldon's client dashboard before we clicked Add Enroll, it does not automatically assume that we are enrolling Sheldon. So you're going to start from scratch when you click Add Enroll. The first screen you're going to see is all the basic information you would need to add a new client. We'll just do a quick overview. Most of this will look familiar. First and last name is very obvious. Date of birth, social security number, gender, language, race, ethnicity, address, sheltered status, contact information, and contact permission. So is it okay if we call you? Okay if we text you? Can we leave you voicemails? There's different options down here. As with many other systems, a little red star here will denote that it's a required field. The next thing you'll probably see here is check for duplicates. So we'll do a live test here, and I'll show you how this would work. Rather than adding Sheldon again, we're going to add me. We're going to add Christopher Thomas. So I'll go to last and first, and now I'm going to click check for duplicates. Quickly, I will say if you had other fields filled in, like SSN or date of birth, you could get a narrower filter to see if there was another person with that same name. In this case, there is no Christopher Thomas in the system. The evidence we have for that is that not a single person appeared here. This means if I am enrolling Christopher Thomas, I know that he is a new client. When you click this is a new client, the only thing that happens is you're taken back to the screen and left with the same blank fields. If we had tried to add an existing client, say Sheldon Capiro, you would have been presented with all of the Sheldon Capiros in the system, and you would have extra identifying information presented to you, like date of birth, social security number, to help you narrow it down. If that person is already in the system, you will be able to click on that person and copy over the information that we already have for them. So as you can imagine, this is a huge time save. One of the main features, the main reasons we use Empower Lancaster, we're all using the same case management software, is so that we can share clients. I think it's pretty common for clients to have multiple enrollments with multiple organizations. So rather than doing the full enrollment workflow every single time, we can copy this information. And certainly for this first screen, this is mostly information that does not change. A person's date of birth, their social security number, these are things that are set in stone. And if we have that information, it will copy over. However, to get the most thorough experience, we are going to enroll a brand new client. So again, we searched for our client, we didn't find him, and now we're going to go through this together, and we'll enter the information that we have. Just starting out, if possible, if it works with your workflow, the way that you do your work, if you can do this assessment and data entry live with your client, that is going to be the best way to get the most accurate information. It's not going to be feasible for every program type. I'm thinking particularly of, let's say, outreach, where interaction might be quite short, and you might not have time to spend, let's say, half an hour asking a series of questions. If you are only able to get this information on paper and add it later, that's acceptable. But the same could go for an Excel spreadsheet. But two things. It's always going to be better to get the data live if you can, because it'll be more accurate and you can see the questions you need to answer. And two, entering information directly into Empower Lancaster is the most secure way to do this. It means that there aren't files floating around, pieces of paper that have client identifying information on them. So all around, doing it live in the system with the client present is the best way to go about this. Now, with that said, we're just going to go through this together. I'll point out different features that I think are worth noting. Other parts are going to be pretty straightforward. For instance, entering name last first is pretty straightforward. But the first one I see right here is birth date. Actually, we'll look at name data quality first. So data quality means that we have different options to describe the information that we got. Name is not a great example because in most cases we're going to have a full name reported, but even here there are other options. Like for instance, if we know that this is an alias, we have only a partial name, we can select those options. Date of birth is a better example of this. So let's say we have the full date of birth, no problem, full DOB reported. If, on the other hand, we have only month, year, day, year, age, we can select these, and the options we're given in this box will change to match. So maybe I only have a client's age. You'll notice that this box has gone from being a month, day, year to just being a blank, right? So we can just type the age right into there. So that is adaptable based on the information that we have available to us. Social security number is the same story. If I have full SSN, it's going to look for 9 digits. If all I have is a approximate or partial, it's going to give me X's, and I can just take the data that I have, don't know, or client refused are also options. In general, please ask every question that's required. If a client doesn't know or a client refused, those are the answers to select. If you select data not collected, that signals to the person doing reporting and then later reporting to HUD that the question was, pardon me, not asked. So these data quality fields, these dropdowns are quite important. One thing I will point out is that Empower Lancaster is smart enough to know that certain SSNs are not possible. So if you enter 111111111, it will later show as an error, and it's possible that we'll ask you later to fix that and get it if you can. The same thing will happen if there is a mismatch between the data quality selected and what you input. So if Empower Lancaster is looking for a full SSN and all it sees is the last four, there will be an error message that shows up on my screen later when I run reports. So again, this is just to say the quality selected and the data entered need to match. Gender is one of the fields that is not a single selection, but rather a multi-select. So you can pick as many as apply. Again, client doesn't know and client refused are options as well. It's generally speaking true. Primary language will automatically be set to English, but there are other options available here. Interpreter needed similarly will automatically be set to no, but you can change it to yes if the answer is yes. There are additional questions about language you can take if you are able to, but they're not required fields. Same is true for marital status, but veteran status is a required field. It's also going to ask if anyone in the household is a spouse or widower of a veteran. Race and ethnicity, I'm sorry, just race, I apologize, is also multi-select. So it's possible to select more than one. Ethnicity, on the other hand, is binary. So either a person is Hispanic or Latino or non-Hispanic, non-Latino. Okay, two more sections on the Add New Client page. Address is next. This will automatically be set to current address. So one thing Empower Lancaster does do is remember all of the addresses entered for a client. So each time a new enrollment happens, you'll either enter a new address, new client, obviously. You will have a address already filled in, because these are required fields, if you found a duplicate client. So you are copying it over from an already existing client. Or you may have found that their address is no longer the same. So potentially you would have an address filled in here. You would ask, are you still at 123 West Orange Street? And they would say, no, now I'm at 123 North Lime Street. By entering a new address here, when you save, their old address will get pushed down one in the list and they'll get a new current address. Something important to remember is that EL does not forget addresses, it just updates the current one. So we'll say that Christopher is currently not sheltered. Like I say, he's at 123 North Lime Street. Looking for doing a zip code lookup, so it's in 17603. That's in Lancaster, PA. I'm going to search for that. And we found it. One thing I want to point out here is that this, while you can use this button to search for an actual map address on a map, you're not required to enter an address that would be recognized as such by, let's say, the post office. You don't have to have number, direction, name, road. You could say on the street in Veterans Plaza. You could say in a storage unit on North Queen. This is just a free text box. So if a client is in a situation where they don't have a postal address, you can enter a brief description of where they're at right now. Okay, finally, contact information. Client has no phone number is an option, which will just collapse those boxes. They'll disappear. But if a client has a phone, like I've said a few times now, if you've got a duplicate client, it will already be filled in. But this is where you would enter phone. If you have entered one, your secondary phone will not be required. You are, however, required to ask for permission to text, permission to leave voicemails, permission to contact you at work. And then these are required fields. Of course, if a client does not have or does not supply an email address, it's safe to select no, because we're not sending anything electronically anyway. You'll notice that the only fields that are required are one phone number and then these permission to contact fields. Okay, so looking back, just this first page, we have taken basic information on this client. He's a new client. We were not able to copy over from an existing client. And we filled in all the information that EL is requiring of us. Now we'll click Save. And if we missed something, it will stop us. If we have not, it'll move on. You'll know if it stops you. It'll take you back to the top of the screen, and there will be a red box that appears that shows you which fields you are missing. So Empower Lancaster enrollments are a one-way street. You can only move forward, and it'll only let you move forward if you fill in the fields at once. So it's really only one way to do it. One thing I'll say, and I'll probably say this 5 more times, is that Empower Lancaster is not particularly smart in terms of saving information. So this button down here, hopefully you can see that, save, is very, very important. If you want information that you've entered to be saved to the system, you need to click save. If I had entered all that information and then clicked the X up here, there's a good chance it would be lost. So saving and moving on is very, very important. It's better to imagine this being an older website. It's not going to have some of the maybe more user-friendly things you might anticipate from a new website. Okay, this next section is very important, the consent form. Bit of background information. Empower Lancaster is a system that shares client information across the social services network in Lancaster County. However, it is necessary for us to get clients' consent to have their information entered to that system. Because Christopher is a new client, he does not have a consent form, and Empower Lancaster is looking for one. So this is going to determine the sharing status of the client. It'll also apply to other family members if there are family members added. And this is going to be a series of selections you'll make to work through consent. So, like I said, the easiest way to do this, or not the easiest, but the most effective, is to have the client present during the assessment. Meaning, is the client physically present to provide consent? Yes. The other option, of course, would be no, and this will change to match. So there are 2 ways we can do this, and we're going to play these out in our imaginations here. So if the answer is yes, Christopher is here, I can click to get a copy of the release of information form, which I can then even print and give to him so that he's aware of what he is consenting to. This document is written in plain English. It is no longer than it needs to be. It describes what Empower Lancaster is, what sharing information means, and why sharing information benefits the client. So once you've done this, the question is, did this client give their consent? Release of information consent. Christopher consents. Yes. What's the date of the consent? Today's date. The reason this is important is that consents are valid for 5 years. So we buy ourselves quite a bit of time, but certainly clients who have been in the system for a long time are going to need to have their consents updated. And we will, in another video, talk about how to get to that screen to update a consent if it needs to be done. The last step here would be to add a signature, signing Christopher Thomas, give Christopher the mouse, ask him to sign, and save. Now, that's one possibility. This might screw up because I've already taken it to the end, but if we had said no, these fields would change, right? And the question is, do you have signed consent documents from the client, right? So the other option here is to have the ROI form ready, print it out, present it to the client, have them sign a paper copy, which you retain physically in their file. So let's say we have signed consents from Christopher. He gave consent. Here I can give the date when it was signed. And here I can browse my computer to find the file that I want to upload to the system. And EL will save that as a PDF for later. So these are the two ways you can get a consent, either electronically, meaning a person gives a signature in a little box, or getting and retaining a signed copy of the consent form. Something to be aware of is that if you click around too much, the system will get confused and you'll need to click cancel down here and start over again, right? So I chose too many options and Empower Lancaster got stuck. So we're going to start again from scratch. Said that this person is present. They gave consent. They gave consent on today's date. And here is their name and signature. Now, by clicking save, we have saved their consent. One thing that does need to be said is that things can get a little bit wonky if a person does not have a consent in the system. When we have a client who can't be found, someone to show that they've entered, often what's happened is that they have been entered, but their consent was not entered or their consent expired. When that happens, if a client does not have an active consent, they are only going to be visible to the person who created that client, right? So if that's not you, and you do have a duplicate client, you copied their information over, but you did not get consent or their consent was expired, that person is not going to belong in the system's eyes to you. They're going to default back to the person who created them in the first place. So consent is really a very, very important part of making the system work as intended, up to and including you being able to see the client who you just entered. We clicked save, we moved on. This is the place where you could add additional family members. And it's going to be kind of a truncated version of what we just did. So here you'd be able to enter first and last, check for duplicates. You can select if they live in the same household, enter basic information, gender, race, ethnicity, language. This is also going to be a new field that would be automatically selected for the first person you entered, which is relation to head of house. There's a lot of options in here, but this is just describing how does each new member relate to that head of house. You can add as many clients this way as you would like. You'll just add that information in and click add row. Oh, I'm sorry. To add another one, yes. You can also close those to go back. So for right now, just for simplicity's sake and timeliness, we're just going to create Christopher for right now. We're not going to add any family members, but this is how you could add family members. Something else to know is that if you find a duplicate client who's your client, you copy them over, you are also going to copy over their household composition. So if Christopher had a spouse and 2 children, they would appear here because they are a part of the same family, same household. clicking save and moving along. Here, if we had additional clients, we could apply consents to those clients as well. Looks very similar to the last screen, but again, we're just going to enter Christopher just to kind of keep things simple here. So we're going to save and move along because he already has a consent. This enrollment add/edit is where things can look quite a bit different, right? So this is where we pick a few different things that are very important. When did this person's enrollment begin, right? So you could do this after the fact. And then also what program am I entering them into? Your provider will be automatically set to the one that your profile is affiliated with. Really is just the program that you'll need to select from. And the program list will be based upon what provider you are, right? So it should be automatically narrowed down only to the programs that you have available to you that you might need to enroll clients into. Because I'm in here as kind of a system administrator, things look a little bit different for me, and I've got more options. But we're just going to pick outreach. We're going to enroll this person in an outreach program. The only other thing that matters on this screen is you can, if you like, assign a case manager here. This is not required. It's only required if you pick that box. So we're going to save here and move along. And the reason I say that this is an important screen is because the things that follow are going to differ, assessments in particular, based on what enrollment what program we're enrolling into, because different program types have different required assessments. So if you enroll a client into a PATH program, they are going to have a different set of assessments than a client entered into an outreach program. This screen is where we select which household members we wish to enroll. This again is kept simpler because Christopher is single, it's his own household. But if we had multiple household members, but only certain ones were being enrolled, this is where you could select or deselect which clients you want to enroll into the program. Once you've done that, selected the clients you want to enroll, click Save, and you move along to the last portion of the Express intake, and that is the assessments. So like I said, these are going to be different depending on which kind of program you are enrolling into, but standard assessments are all going to start with the word HUD. So we'd have HUD Universal, HUD Financial, HUD Program, and HUD Health Insurance. The reason they start with HUD is because these are the ones that HUD requires us to take for most programs. And they're important information. They describe a client, they describe their current living situation, their current financial situation. And like I said at the beginning of this video, these are the success markers that we can use to say, yes, we achieved success with this client. We improved their housing situation. We increased their income. We got them health insurance while they were in residence. These are things that we set at entry, and then we set again either at annual assessment and or at exit. And it's those two assessments that let us show progress. This HUD Universal Assessment is probably the most important of all because this is what describes the client's living situation at entry, like the night before they came to you, where were they sleeping is essentially what this is asking. And it also establishes, is this person a chronically homeless individual? Now, these are really important because, one, we want to make sure that we know the clients who are enrolled in our programs came to us in a homeless situation, if that is in fact the case. We also want to make sure that if we have chronic homelessness in Lancaster County, that we are accurately counting those chronically homeless people, because this is very important. When we communicate with HUD, we do an annual PIT count, that we get accurate numbers to accurately describe the severity of the need in Lancaster County. So working through the HUD Universal Assessment, there's a few fields here that we're going to need to fill in, so they're all required. The first of these is client location. This is where you pick the provider to associate this client with. When you click on this search box, a new box will pop out. This is where you should see your organization name in here as a provider. So this is going to look different depending upon which user is using it. This is where you would select your provider. I'm going to pick chart as a placeholder for right now because what I have access to. What this fills in is the continuum of care code. So when we report this back to HUD, HUD knows this is from the Lancaster City and County COC. That's a really important field. We get that from client location. Next in here, we have disabling condition. So again, we're imagining that we are working through this series of assessments with a client. This is a question simply, do you have a disability, yes or no? Now, again, in that calculating chronic homelessness video, which I'll link to, we go into a little bit more of what disabilities fit according to HUD's definition of chronic homelessness. So we can get a little deeper into it there, but really it just does come down to a question of, are you disabled? Do you have a disability? Yes or no? Or of course, client doesn't know, client refused are also options. Then you get to prior living situation. Now, I want to be really clear, I say this a lot. This is something of a misnomer. This is HUD's term. What they really want here is, where was this person immediately before they came into your program? So if this person is entering into an emergency shelter project and last night they were sleeping in their car in a parking lot, their prior living situation will be a place not meant for human habitation. The reason that there's other options here is that we don't necessarily take for granted that every client will be category 1 homeless when they come into one of our projects. We may, for example, be operating a prevention project where our clients are insecurely housed, not yet homeless. Let's say they are in a rental by client without subsidy. We're serving them to try and keep them at the same housing status and improve their permanence in that housing location. But Christopher, in this case, is in a place not meant for human habitation. So we're going to select that. He's category 1 homeless. The reason this is important is because HUD wants to know, and we want to know, of our clients, how many of them are in a literally homeless situation, because that helps us to get a clear picture of the situation in the county. It helps us to prioritize better. So misusing this field can have a lot of ramifications down the line. So making sure that we use it to describe, where was this client before they entered your project? Basically, where were they sleeping last night is really important. These questions that follow have to do with the length that a person has been homeless, the number of times they've been homeless, and the cumulative length of homelessness, because all of these things together determine whether a person is chronically homeless or not. So we have the first question here, length of stay in the prior living situation, meaning how long has this person been in this prior living situation? We have a number of options that start short, 1 night or less, 2 to 6 nights, a week or more, go all the way up to a year or longer. And quickly, this just gets into other categories of homelessness. So if a person has been in a situation for sometimes over a certain period of time, they become category 1 homeless, or I'm sorry, they become homeless or they become not homeless. So the length of time in the prior living situation is important for calculating that homeless status. And these last two are what tell us the kind of the chronic nature. So has this person been in this homeless situation for a year or more? Or do the number of times they've been homeless in the last 3 years, this includes in an emergency shelter, add up to 12 or more months in those 3 years? So for Christopher, we're going to assume he's been homeless for more than 1 year, but it's been a single uninterrupted episode of homelessness. Really quick, this means that Christopher is chronically homeless. Somewhere in EL, when we save this, we're going to get one more person who has chronically homeless equals yes status, because he has a disability, he's been homeless for more than 1 year, and he's currently in a homeless living situation. So that is the HUD Universal in short. Moving along, have a HUD financial assessment. This can be quite simple. If a client does not have income from any source, no, save no income. If, on the other hand, they do have income, we have a field of options. We call this multi-select. So you can select more than one. The person has multiple income sources. This is one thing that Empower Lancaster does well for us. It automatically calculates the monthly amount, which helps us to calculate percent of AMI or percent of poverty. So we can pick our interval. So how often does Christopher get paid this amount? And it calculates for us his monthly income. We can, like I said, select multiples here, and we can select none. We can also select client doesn't know and client refused. This is fairly straightforward, but again, speaking of what is the enrollment doing? What is it capturing? This means that at entry, Christopher had an income of $500 biweekly. If in the course of his enrollment, he gains another income source or he increases his income source, that will signal that this project has helped one of our clients to increase their income. So we have to have two different points to compare and show growth. Moving along, we have what's called HUD program data. These are questions about supplemental questions about that client's status. So is this client a DV victim or survivor? No, yes, doesn't know, refused. Does this client have non-cash benefits from any source? And depending upon what you pick, this will change. So if I say that Christopher has non-cash benefits, I'll be prompted to choose which non-cash benefits does he have. Again, if a client gains this between entry and exit, we'll be able to show that we had a client who gained something during their enrollment. Health insurance is simply yes or no. And then questions about specific disabling conditions. Does this client have a substance use disorder? Is that a drug use disorder, alcohol use disorder? Both. Doesn't know, refused. Mental health disorder, same. If you select yes, there'll be a follow-up question having to do with the duration and severity of that disability, meaning does this disabling condition cause impairment? Is essentially what this question is asking. HIV/AIDS, physical disability, all of these get taken, all have a client refused option. Saving. This is the last assessment. It is a health insurance assessment. This again is multi-select. The way that this is set up to start off with is that every one of these ticks will be selected and everything will be set to no. So if our client has any of these health insurance types, including other, which would ask us to specify the other, we will select yes in that option and save. At this point, we have completed our workflow. Just going to click Finish Workflow, close that window, and now we find ourselves back at the client data dashboard. To close the loop here and show what we've done, all right, looking at the dashboard here, we see now that Christopher has an open enrollment under Outreach. The enrollment was created today, 8/30/2023. Also has an active consent, which is good for the next 5 years. His finances have been updated. Of course, as time goes on, you'll have more points added to this graph. And then finally, we'll look more at this menu later, but if you go to case management, program enrollment, we now see this, we just accomplished. We can always go back here, click that status, and view the assessments we just did. If we want to review them. And we can also look in a later video how you could go back and update or edit those assessments. But for right now, we have completed the task of enrolling a client. It was a brand new client too, right? So we had to create this client and creating that enrollment. Everything that follows, things about case notes, things about services, they're going to follow from this enrollment or be attached to this enrollment. Thanks.